Today I'm going to paint this red rose. I find that red color is a little bit challenging because by itself it's not really very light. So I made this value sketch so that I actually remember to create enough contrast between the sunlit areas of the flower and those in the shadow. And I exaggerated that a little bit, but as I go working with color, I will adjust for that. I also created a palette of colors that I'm going to use, at least most of them, and maybe I will add a few later. But I want to see that I actually had my darker reds, some mid-tones, and some lighter colors. Those pinks, right now, if you look at that and at the flower, we don't really see those light pinks in it, but that's for color layering later. I'm working on non-sanded paper. It's just a regular toned light mid-tone gray paper. And also I'm working with hot pastel right now, kind of very bright red right now to set up the outlines of the flower. And I'm trying to be looser so that I don't end up doing like a coloring book project here. So eventually I will still work with the shapes, not just trying to color each flower petal separately. And these are hot pastels here right now. So you see the darker, the kind of warmer red, and then a little bit cooler red that has a little bit more blue. So with this darker kind of burgundy color, maybe maroon, I'm setting up this shadow area of the flower. And you can see how that bright red actually is still showing through and letting me know about the borders. But of course, as I'm working, I can maybe separate some of the flowers by adding a little bit more of a shadow there. And I will see the outlines still. Also, some of them just getting lost in the process, and that's okay because I will find them again, and eventually the borders between the petals or any object should be not the lines. If we are working in a realistic style, it's not the lines that should be telling us that there's a border of this object and that's where another one begins, and here this is the petals, but it is the value change. That's what should tell us, okay, here's one petal and it's casting the shadow on the other one, so we see that another one is a little bit lighter or darker, and that's the difference. And I'm talking about the general concept, not some specific petals here. It's just moving too fast for me to comment on specific petals. Here I'm still working with hot pastels, kind of layering, cross-hatching some of the brighter red, a little bit lighter red over that darker color. And now this more pink, but it's still that hot pink they call it, but as a color it's in comparison to those other two that I have in the top right. This is a cooler color, it has more blue in it. So I'm creating the contrast of the shadows and the sunlit area of the petals, not just with a value change, but also with a little bit of a color change, color temperature change. There is some reflected light in the shadows and it's warming them up. And here I find, because of that, and also because the petals are kind of semi-translucent, they let the light through, there's a lot of luminous color in the shadows of the flowers. So that's why it's kind of a lot of red, a lot of glowing color right now added to the petals, even to the shadow areas. I have that pretty chromatic red, particularly at the borders of the shadows, maybe, or some areas that are catching some of that reflected light. In the center of the flower, that's that green. And here it is, I'm adding some of the pink at the areas of the flower that catches more sunlight, that is in the direct sunlight. And now I will start shaping the petals more. If earlier I was just trying to work with larger shapes, now I can start with this a little bit lighter pink. I'm starting to add those parts of the petals that are in more direct sunlight, that are a little bit lighter. And if it's becoming a little bit flat, I can go back with this darker color, and now this is actually softer pastel and it's creating more of that darker, richer color than the harder pastel was doing. And see how deeper the inside of the flower looks now because of that darker color. And now I can also go around these petals with a little bit of a shadow that will push the back petals back a little bit, the inner part, and also will let those inside petals stand out a little bit more because they are lighter and they are more silhouetted against that. And it's actually getting a shape now, and it's minor details now. That's what I'm working on, trying to bring in a little bit more of that reflected light maybe in some areas, and just add vibrancy, because the lighter the red gets, the more diluted the chroma is, and it's kind of losing that intensity. So with this brighter, more saturated red, I'm adding a little bit more of that glow back. And with a cooler pink, there are some areas of the outside of the petals here at the top, for example, or somewhere on the planes of the petals that are facing maybe the sky a little bit more and pick up a little bit more blue from it. So that's where this color is going. And it's nice to create the variety of these reds inside, because otherwise it just will be a very boring, just all red flower. So here basically what I'm trying to do is to create the shadows without going into those very muted gray colors. I probably could bring a little bit more of that, but I'm just trying to see how far I will push it with this more luminous color or colors that I'm using. And of course, every sketch is an experiment, so sometimes I'm just going a little bit further than maybe it was necessary, but so far I think it's still on track. But it is a good idea to make sketches like this, just to kind of experiment and not to worry about ruining the piece, because maybe like in a more finished work you already set up the areas around, you have the foliage, you have other flowers, and now you are a little bit more reserved about making changes, about trying things out. But when it's a small sketch like this, it's easier. And let's add a little bit more color to this and a little bit more shape to the inside of the flower. And the trick is it shouldn't really jump out too much. Like that green, it's a complementary color to the red, and of course it creates a lot of contrast, so it's probably better if it was toned down a little bit more. And it's also getting the reflected light as well. Also, if we kind of zoom in a little bit more into that center of the flower, there's almost like a purplish color to it. So that's why I added some of that purple, and also it tones down the red a little bit. But as much as I toned it down, I'm still getting back with a kind of a little bit more chromatic color. And let's try how this will look if I add some of this foliage around. So with the foliage, so that I don't end up with the flower just looking like a cutout flower, I also want to break it up into some different areas of color and maybe have that maroon color kind of continue behind the flower, maybe like indicate some of the flowers that we don't see in the shadows that are very dark, kind of parts of those, and some of the darker foliage, and maybe even some of that fence behind or wall. And here's how that would look. And also when I'm working from the outside, I can chisel some of these petals a little bit more if I need to create harder edges, but also I can soften them a little bit if it ends up a little too hard-edged all around. I can do that. And another way to kind of integrate the flower into the foliage, into the background better, would be not to just make some of its edges softer, kind of by pushing the pigment a little bit so that it is physically a softer edge, but also by creating less of a contrast around the flower in certain areas. Like for example, here we have that burgundy color that is less contrasting with red than green is, so that creates a little bit softer transition into the reds. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you love painting flowers, check out my magnolia flowers demo next.